What's up, heathens? How ya doing? So tonight we have PragerU. Yes, we are going to be doing a PragerU video on climate change, more specifically carbon dioxide. Apparently, if you guys didn't know this, CO2 is organic, which makes it a green energy somehow.
In other words, fossil fuels are 100% organic and were produced with solar energy. Sounds positively green. If there were no carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, the Earth would be a dead planet.
And if you want to learn why they're wrong, please stay tuned. We're going to go ahead, we're going to listen to what this guy has to say. And
what are two of the dirtiest words in the English language?
Whale dick. No, okay, so if you guys can't tell right now, I'm going to try to point this out, but he's the co-founder of Greenpeace. This is, I feel like, is an attempt at a genetic fallacy. This is an excerpt from a statement from Greenpeace about Patrick Moore. Patrick Moore did not found Greenpeace. Patrick Moore frequently portrays himself as a founder or co-founder of Greenpeace, and many news outlets have repeated this characterization. Although Mr. Moore played a significant role in Greenpeace Canada for several years, he did not found Greenpeace. Phil Cote, Irving Stowe, and Jim Bolin founded Greenpeace in 1970. Patrick Moore applied for a berth on the Phyllis Cormac in March 1971 after the organization had already been in existence for a year. A copy of his application letter and Greenpeace's response are available from Greenpeace. So no, he is not a co-founder of Greenpeace, and this was definitely a genetic fallacy to give him some kind of credence to talk on the matter of CO2. Starting right off the bat here, Prager is not doing good. Also, I contend with your whole idea that you're a university. I know you got a lax definition of what fucking university is.
Now, if university means, by definition, you grant degrees and you are accredited by whoever accredits universities to be a degree-granting place, then we're not a university. But is that the only definition? My contention is that it is a university, but it doesn't grant degrees and it's not accredited, and that's absolutely accurate. We don't portray ourselves as what we're not. But if a university is a place to learn and learn and learn and study and study and study and gain wisdom, then why aren't we a university?
But you're not a university there, Prager. You make YouTube videos and you do it poorly. You don't even provide good information.
Well, if you're concerned with global warming, as so many people are these days, the answer is obvious. The two words are carbon dioxide.
Oh shit, I was wrong, honey. I thought it was whale dicks. Technically, Hovind said whale penis, so saying whale dick has to be dirtier, right? Is whale cock dirtier than whale dick? I don't know. Let's talk about whale dick more.
Or, as it is known by its chemical symbol, CO2. 1 atom of carbon and 2 atoms of oxygen.
And that will be the most scientific thing this entire video says.
If we pump much more of it into the atmosphere, the argument goes, we're going to alter the climate catastrophically.
Yes, if we continue adding excess CO2 to the atmosphere, it will destabilize our current environment and cause some radical changes. And the amount of CO2 that we're pumping into the atmosphere is not being reabsorbed during the carbon cycle. You see, there's a natural cycle here on Earth called the carbon cycle. And what it does is it moves carbon throughout the entire environment through respiration and combustion and decomposition and all these other things. Like photosynthesis is another process in this particular cycle. Diffusion is also another one. The seas can actually absorb some CO2 and some carbon, and then you can also have some carbon escape the seas as well. So there's multiple processes in the carbon cycle that keep carbon dioxide or carbon in general moving throughout our ecosystem. But you see, it's important that that particular cellular cycle stays in balance. Because if it goes out of balance, then there are things that get corrected, as it were. There are effects of it being like different. So if you have a different carbon cycle, then you're going to have a different environment.
According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, CO2 emissions from fossil fuels, which constitute 85% of our energy use, must be reduced to zero by 2100.
So, yes, it's very important for us to try to stop adding CO2 to the carbon cycle. We've been adding a whole lot of it, and only about 40% of what's being added to the atmosphere is being reabsorbed back into the system. And so what you get is this piling up over time of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that causes our Earth to warm up. And we're not talking like 50 degrees warm up. We're talking like 1.5 degrees kind of warming up. And it's slated to warm up by another full degree Celsius in the future. Because right now, the cycle in our environment is out of balance. Nature wants to seek a balance, not to make it sound sentient or anything like that, but if there's ever an imbalance, the natural process is for it to go back in balance. And for it to be in balance, it needs to be 1 degree hotter. So the more CO2 that we add to our atmosphere in various ways is just going to keep our Earth warming up and effectively change our climate.
If we don't save ourselves from ourselves, we're toast. That's the claim. Here's what's strange, though. All life is carbon-based, and the carbon for all that life originates from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. All of the carbon in the fossil fuels we are burning for energy today was once in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide before it was consumed by plankton in the sea and plants on the land.
He's right. The carbon cycle is very important for life here on Earth. If we didn't have the carbon cycle, then we wouldn't have life. But you see, the important thing to know is that we've had different atmospheres throughout time. You see, what happened was in the Paleoproterozoic era, there was enough like bacteria and photosynthetic organisms that added a lot of oxygen to the environment, and that caused the CO2 to plummet. And this is the great oxidation event, where more oxygen was available and that allowed creatures to move from the sea to the land. Because of that, we have the diversity of life now. But the important thing to know is that was a totally different environment. And the carbon that we have in the crust of the Earth, while true, at one point in time, it was part of the atmosphere, because in the very first atmosphere that was part of the Earth was pretty much just nitrogen and CO2. And then carbon dioxide, the carbon started to get absorbed into the Earth, and then that caused, other things to happen. That was the death of the first atmosphere. And then you got the second atmosphere that arose, and now we have our modern atmosphere.
Coal, oil, and natural gas are the remains of those plankton and plants that have been transformed by heat and pressure deep in the Earth's crust. In other words, fossil fuels are 100% organic and were produced with solar energy. Sounds positively green.
No, coal, natural gas, and all that is not green energy. What green in the power and energy kind of context means is that you're not adding more CO2 to the atmosphere, because right now CO2 is not the only greenhouse gas that exists in our atmosphere, but it is the one that is being inflated by our current usage. So that's what we mean by green energy. The fact that you can connect the dots on going from the sun all the way down to like plankton and plants and all of that kind of stuff with the carbon cycle, just because you can do that doesn't mean that it's solar energy or that it's green, okay? That's totally ridiculous. You're obfuscating what it means to be green energy down to the point where it can literally mean anything. And that doesn't help anybody in this situation. That doesn't help your case. It doesn't help to have the term green energy if you're just going to mean everything is green energy.
If there were no carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, the Earth would be a dead planet. Period. Talk about catastrophic climate change.
yes, if the carbon cycle stopped working and there was no carbon whatsoever in our atmosphere, there could still be it like here on Earth in carbon-based life forms, respiration and all that. If we removed all carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, that would be very bad for the Earth. That's true, but that's also not what climate change activists are arguing for. We're talking about reducing our extra load we're putting on the carbon cycle. We're not talking about removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Take away CO2 and you'd have it. And yet the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has deemed this essential ingredient for life a pollutant.
Well, yes, it is a pollutant because of the way that we use it and the way that we add to the carbon cycle. It pollutes our environment. It is something foreign to the current carbon cycle that we're adding to it. It's polluting it. It's not wrong to say that it is a pollutant because of the way that we use it. He doesn't want to tell you this, though, because he's praising the CO2 molecule and fossil fuels in general. He wants to beef it up and make it sound like it's not so bad, when it really is bad if you just understand the basics of the science.
But how can something that makes life possible be bad?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes sex is kind of bad. I mean, have you never heard of like STDs and AIDS and all these other sexually transmitted shit? Sex, one of the uses of it is life, right? So how can something that makes life possible be bad? Now, I would contend that any religious person would think that sex is bad before marriage, but after marriage, it's like fine. For some reason, that man-made weird concept of marriage makes it okay, and I don't understand that. But anyways, too much of something can always be bad.
Before I deal with that question, let's get clear on our terms. It has become common to refer to the emissions from burning fossil fuels for energy as carbon emissions. That is entirely misleading. Carbon dioxide is not carbon.
Carbon dioxide isn't carbon, and therefore, I guess it's not part of the carbon cycle, is it? Even though he's been talking about the carbon cycle this entire time. It's talking about carbon emissions because of the emissions of cars cause CO2 to be added to the atmosphere. So they're carbon emissions because it's carbon dioxide. Carbon is a main component in carbon dioxide. No, honey, it's not just carbon. But carbon emissions would include carbon dioxide because its prime component's fucking carbon.
Carbon dioxide is a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas which is an indispensable food for all living things. Can you have too much of it? In theory, yes.
Oh my god, it's like this guy here has never heard of the fucking carbon cycle. Seriously, dude. Why are you doing this to me, okay? Obviously, if you add too much carbon to the carbon cycle, it's going to be very bad. Because CO2 absorbs heat, and that's the problem. That's why it's a greenhouse gas. When the sun emits its light and radiation and all that kind of stuff, and it hits the earth, it causes the earth to heat up a little bit. Well, carbon absorbs that heat and keeps it here on Earth, therefore warming up the Earth. And that causes a lot of problems. Like, for one thing, did you know that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere absorbs or is infused into like the seas and stuff when the oceans are colder? So if you have warmer oceans, then you have less carbon that's being absorbed by the oceans, and therefore more carbon in the atmosphere, more carbon in the carbon cycle that's not getting absorbed, more carbon there to trap more heat. And we're going to heat up more. See, it's a compounding issue here. This guy just doesn't seem to understand what the carbon cycle is, though. Yes, you can have too much of it, and we have too much of it now.
That's what climate alarmists say is happening now. CO2 levels are getting too high.
They are already too fucking high. It's over, 450 parts per million? Let's see, current CO2 levels. In 2018, it was 407 parts per million. 407 parts per million. That is twice the amount of what it was prior to the industrial revolution when we started burning fossil fuels. It's twice the amount. We're artificially adding that much CO2 to our atmosphere, and it's going to have serious consequences. They want to act like, oh, this is all completely normal. And they're about to get into what their all completely normal is really looking like.
Are they right? Well, if we look at the big picture, we find something surprising. For most of the history of life on Earth, carbon dioxide has been present in the atmosphere at much higher levels than it is today. During the Cambrian explosion, when multicellular life first came on the scene, CO2 levels were as much as 10 times higher than they are today.
Yes, they were. I'm talking softly now so I don't scream. It was a completely different fucking atmosphere, you dipshit. Okay? True, it was a lot higher back then. But also there was no animals on the face of the earth at that time. It wasn't until the oxidation event, until these organisms could start making their way onto land. And that didn't happen until our current atmosphere was in place. So basically, you're comparing our modern atmosphere now to one where nothing was living on the surface of the earth? Like, are you sure you want to make that particular comparison? Because it kind of seems like a false equivalence here.
From a big picture perspective, we're actually living in a low carbon dioxide era.
Which is why life was able to crawl out of the sea and onto the land. Fucking dipshit.